Indirect objects in English are nouns or pronouns that receive direct objects by answering the questions to whom or for whom. Indirect objects are the person or thing that receives the direct object, and because they do so, they're always used with direct objects in sentences. Some simple phrases are, I bought a car for my friend. You gave a present to the teacher. He wrote a letter to his girlfriend. She made a cake for her boyfriend. We owe money to the bank. They show their design to the boss. The indirect objects in these sentences are all nouns because they come after the direct objects by receiving them. Plus, every single sentence answers the questions to whom or for whom. For whom did I buy a car? I bought a car for my friend. To whom did you give the present? You gave a present to the teacher. To whom did he write a letter? He wrote a letter to his girlfriend, and so on. While the indirect objects make sense, it's also important to point out the direct objects. The direct objects are all nouns because they all come after the verb. However, they don't necessarily have to be nouns and can instead have the pronoun form, making them simpler to distinguish from the indirect objects that are nouns. I bought it for my friend. You gave it to the teacher. He wrote it to his girlfriend, and so on. This way, by using the direct object pronoun it, we can tell what makes the direct object different from the indirect object nouns. When grammatically using the prepositions to and for that precede nouns, we will automatically know that they are indirect objects. 1, because they come with the grammatical prepositions, and 2, because they come after direct objects. Sometimes, people have difficulty differentiating indirect objects from direct objects. This is okay because any sentence that has an indirect object also has a direct object, but the word order might change depending on the expression, and is something important that I'll explain later. Direct objects receive the action of the verb and answer what or whom. Indirect objects receive the direct objects and answer to whom or for whom, mainly working with persons and people. While direct objects can be nouns or personal pronouns, indirect objects can be nouns or pronouns that mainly refer to people. They can refer to objects, but the majority of the time, they will refer to people. Direct objects are only used with transitive verbs and sometimes ambitransitive, and so indirect objects are also only used with these verbs. Intransitive verbs do not take any direct or indirect objects because they're logical enough on their own. I already explained this concept in the previous video. If there's one object in a sentence, it's probably a direct object. Considering that indirect objects will always be with direct objects, they will typically be placed between the verb and the direct object. Sometimes, when using the prepositions to or for with nouns or pronouns, they will come at the end of the sentence. When looking back at the phrases from the beginning, the verbs in every sentence are considered to be ditransitive, meaning that they have both direct and indirect objects. These verbs include to ask, to bring, to sell, to send, to give, to make, to show, to tell, to write, to take, and more. Ditransitive verbs take two objects, one direct and one indirect, and therefore they work with both direct and indirect objects. When questioning these verbs, they will automatically generate a direction to someone or for someone, which is why they answer to whom or for whom. For instance, the verb to give can make us ask, give to whom, using the direction toward someone. The verb to make can also make us ask, make for whom, using the direction for someone. This is the reason for their questions. Now, I've previously said that the word order of direct and indirect objects might change depending on the expression, and here's what I mean. Very frequently, indirect objects are rephrased as prepositional phrases, typically by using the prepositions to or for. When that happens, the indirect objects will not really be counted as indirect objects as much as the objects of the prepositions. Because indirect objects always come with direct objects, the indirect objects typically come after the verb and before the direct object. However, when grammatically using the prepositions to or for, indirect objects will come at the end of the sentence and will act as prepositional phrases. Typically, the word order is a subject, a verb, an indirect object, and then a direct object. However, the word order can change to a subject, verb, direct object, and indirect object that acts like a prepositional phrase, with to or for. The examples that I showed at the beginning can technically be rewritten if the indirect objects act as prepositional phrases, typically using the prepositions to or for. By saying the sentence, I bought a car for my friend, we have a subject, a verb, a direct object, and an indirect object that acts like a prepositional phrase. We can put the indirect object before the direct object if we decide to not use the preposition for. So, it will look like this. I bought my friend a car. Now, the word order is typical. Subject, verb, indirect object, and direct object. By analyzing both sentences, I bought a car for my friend, I bought my friend a car, the meaning is the same in the two phrases, just in a different order. Both sentences answer what did I buy? I bought a car, signifying that it's a direct object. Both sentences also answer for whom did I buy, because buy is a ditransitive verb. I bought my friend a car, or I bought a car for my friend. This is how the word order can change depending on the grammatical expression. Typically, when the indirect object doesn't use to or for, it means that the sentence flow is faster and saves time, while still answering for whom. But if we decide to keep a preposition, it means that the sentence flow is more specific, so we have more of a certain direction toward someone, still answering for whom. By having a preposition, the indirect object will act as a prepositional phrase. The same thing can be done with the other examples. You gave the teacher a present. You gave a present to the teacher. He wrote his girlfriend a letter. He wrote a letter to his girlfriend. She made her boyfriend a cake. She made a cake for her boyfriend. We owe the bank money. We owe money to the bank. They showed the boss their design. They showed their design to the boss. In every first sentence, the word order is subject, verb, indirect object, and direct object. The indirect objects are all nouns and they have a faster sentence flow. But in every second sentence, the word order is subject, verb, direct object, and indirect object. In these cases, the indirect objects act as prepositional phrases, so the sentence flow is more specific and has a certain direction toward someone. In the following examples, the indirect objects don't have to be nouns. They can also be pronouns that likewise receive the action of direct objects by answering to whom or for whom. So far, we have only seen nouns that answer to whom or for whom, so indirect object pronouns replace nouns that have already been mentioned. Indirect object pronouns also replace nouns to avoid repetition and improve communication. In English, indirect object pronouns look like this: me, you, him, her, it, us, and them. In comparison to direct object pronouns, every pronoun is exactly the same. However, do not confuse them with direct objects because they each have a different function. With the following pronouns, they will work as indirect objects only if they're placed after a verb and before a direct object. They will act as indirect objects if they do not use a preposition and if their sentence flow saves time. By turning them into prepositional phrases, we can implement the typical prepositions to or for to every pronoun, and now we have a clear difference, and so we can understand that these are indirect object pronouns that act as prepositional phrases. Without prepositions, the objects are indirect, but with the prepositions, the objects are prepositional. Going back to the previous examples, we can again rewrite all of these with pronouns so that they are visible and understandable. Having indirect object pronouns, the phrases will look like this: I bought you a car. I bought a car for you. You gave me a present. You gave a present to me. He wrote her a letter. He wrote a letter to her. She made him a cake. She made a cake for him. We owe them money. We owe money to them. They showed us their design. They showed their design to us. This is how indirect objects function as pronouns. They avoid repetition and save time when communicating. In every first sentence, the indirect object pronouns function as indirect objects, but in every second sentence, the indirect objects act as complete prepositional phrases. Also, each phrase answers the questions to whom or for whom. For whom did I buy a car? I bought him a car, or I bought a car for him. To whom did you give a present? You gave me a present, or you gave a present to me, and so on. Moreover, indirect objects and prepositional phrases are often interchangeable, but there is one case when a prepositional phrase is better grammatically, when both the direct and indirect objects are pronouns. In the beginning, I showed what happens when direct object pronouns are used with indirect object nouns, and grammatically, not much happens. Later, I showed what happens when direct object nouns are used with indirect object pronouns. They lose the prepositions, avoid repetition, and make a faster sentence flow. Now, what happens if direct and indirect object pronouns are used in one sentence? Well, in that case, the indirect object pronoun will be better used as a prepositional phrase when there are two pronouns in a sentence. He gave me this pen. Me is the indirect object pronoun, but this pen is the direct object noun. To change the noun into a pronoun, it would grammatically be better if the indirect object pronoun became a prepositional phrase. So, rather than saying, he gave me it, it's better to say, he gave it to me. This way, to me acts like a prepositional phrase and is done on purpose so that the sentence flow is more specific. He gave it to me has the word order of subject, verb, direct object pronoun, and indirect object pronoun acting as a prepositional phrase. This sentence flow is more logical than awkwardly saying, he gave me it. By saying, he gave me it, the sentence doesn't use a preposition, so the meaning is still there, but the word order is really not formal and is not really spoken or written like that. To improve the sentence and any other phrase that has two pronouns, we make the indirect object pronoun act like a prepositional phrase. This is a very essential concept that many people have to watch out for, and I would advise to remember it because it's practical to understand which order makes the sentence flow better. Anyhow, this is the role of indirect objects in English.